morning, good afternoon to those of you guys from Europe. Good evening for the folks in Australia. This is Jim Nasser. I'm with the HBAR Foundry. This is our first town hall of 2024. Really excited to have the Governing Council, the Hedera Governing Council on this town hall. It's really, I think it's our first time directly connecting from the HBAR Foundry, the builders community, to the Governing Council. And yeah, I think it's going to be a riveting conversation, as the English say. It's going to be a banger. So I'm going to talk a little bit less, get us going. Basically, just a quick introduction about the HBAR Foundry before we get into the conversation. HBAR Foundry is really a decentralized group of builders in the Hedera community. This community has been around since early 2020, I believe, so 3.5 years or so. And Jeremy Fletcher, who is the founding member of HBAR Foundry, got these meetings going on Fridays. Every Friday, I don't think we have missed a single one in 3.5 years. And it started as more or less a water cooler setting for us. Of course, virtually, this was at the height of COVID, but now it's really continued, and I think it's evolved into a much more, expansive community of builders, where we have these town halls, as you see, and we have a core team with driving agendas around projects, around other educational content, and really connecting the community of developers and builders, within the Hedera network. So that's really a little bit of background. That being said, we are going to get into our town hall. I think that's what we're all here for, and I'm not going to do nearly enough justice to introduce our speakers, and I'm going to let them do it themselves. So we have Charles Adkins, who is a new president of Hedera. He just started, I believe, a month and a half ago, and on almost the complete opposite end, we have Simon Olson from Magazine Louisa, one of the very first governing council members and a board member, and it's been around for a long time. So that being said, I'm going to start with you, Simon, if you don't mind. Just tell us a bit about yourself. How did you get into Hedera and the governing council? We'd love to hear that.
Great. So first, the usual disclaimers. I am indeed an HBAR holder. These represent my opinions, not the opinions of Magazine Louisa or Magalu, the company I represent. And also, this is not investment advice. Okay, so that out of the way. So I'll talk a little bit about my background. So I'm from New York originally, but I've lived in Brazil for 20 years or so. And I was a partner at one of the first venture capital firms in Brazil. 2005, I sold our portfolio company, Aquan, to Google, which was one of Google's first dozen acquisitions ever. 2007, I partnered our venture capital firm with Draper Fisher Jurvetson, which is Tim Draper's venture capital firm. After that, 2010, I joined Google Brazil as the head of new business development for Brazil. And then since then, I've been at Magazine Louisa, or Magalu as it's colloquially known. I'm the director of new business development and investor relations. And I just recently left, but I'm now the full-time representative for Magalu on the Hedera Council. So that's a little bit about my background. If you want me to go into how I first heard about Hedera, it's actually a funny story. So I like to cook, and I'm from New York originally, as I mentioned, so I like to make Italian food. And so one weekend in February 2018, I was making meatballs and spaghetti. And I had my hands, deep in some ground beef making the meatballs. And the YouTube video that I was watching switched from the previous video that I was watching ended. And this guy came on giving a presentation and talking about a new consensus algorithm that he had invented, which used very little energy and didn't have much latency and was highly scalable. And it was music to my ears, because I always was super fascinated by Bitcoin and blockchain, but I was always very frustrated by the energy use and the latency. And so when I heard this guy talking about a new consensus algorithm that overcame those issues, I was extremely interested. So that's how I kind of first heard about Hedera. And then basically, so that was on, let's say, a Saturday or a Sunday. That Monday, I sent an email to whatever it was, like info@hashgraph.com or something like that, and said, hey, my name is Simon, head of new business development at one of the leading tech companies in Latin America. Let's look for something to do together. And so the rest is history. So now it's, I think officially this week it'll be, actually next week it'll be officially 6 years. So long time.
That is amazing. I think that's the first time, Simon, at least in my jaded memory, that we can attribute something really good to a YouTube algorithm.
Right.
There's plenty of bad things that have happened from YouTube algorithms going rogue, but that's fascinating. I had no idea about that. Amazing. Well, we're going to get into some more about your background, but in the meantime, Charles, you're, like I mentioned, you're kind of on the opposite side, but you have such a rich background in Web3, and you've been around. You have 1 million followers. Love to hear more about you and your background and how you got into Hedera.
Yeah, so my background actually started traditionally. I call it the classically trained investment banker kind of pathway. So, went to school, finance and econ, started out at Morgan Stanley, did an internship, then did private equity for 6 years there. After the financial crisis, I got somewhat voluntold to move over to U.S. Department of Treasury, where I helped with, foreign national fund tracking, because at the time at Morgan Stanley, I was working a lot with EB-5 visas, investments. And so I kind of knew how international money moved around and kind of working and seeing how those things actually happen. Went back and forth to Chicago at the time, ended up hanging out with a lot of the guys that started Uber and Groupon, and used some of their technology actually at Uber to build a food delivery company, which was subsequently bought by Grubhub, which was the first startup that I kind of had and then was sold. But because of the way that I did marketing around that company and the exponential growth, I ended up becoming a senior marketing consultant with Red Bull and Nike, who had both asked me to come in and work on some of their digital platforms. Red Bull specifically for live events, Nike specifically for the Kobe Bryant line. So did that for a few years, and through kind of the connections I had with basketball, ended up in a conversation with Mark Cuban at one point, who had just invested in Polygon. And this was probably 2017, 18. And he had just mentioned to me, like, you should really check out this technology. And, kind of like going down that rabbit hole, like Simon, next thing you know, I'm sending an email to Polygon and saying, what can I do here? Can I help you guys, do anything? I ended up as the vice president of enterprise and NFTs at Polygon for several years. And then on with, most people know, prior to this, I was with Aptos, the layer 1 blockchain that came out of the Diem and Libra project at Facebook. And then, I was asked to come on board and as the new president of Hedera. But I'd actually learned about Hedera around 2019, 18, around the same time that I was at Polygon. And, everybody was kind of intrigued by it. It's how do they get these big companies to work with them? And I knew some people that were building on the network at the time. So it was always exciting to me, and it was always on my radar. And it was a very different way to do consensus and a very different way to do governance, which was really interesting. Every other chain was kind of running around doing a rogue thing, and Hedera just had this really strong structure around a long-term thought process, not going to, flame out and burn out quickly. So I always was really intrigued by the thought process on the governing council. And so, just really excited to be at this point today and helping to push that forward.
Yeah.
Very, it's fantastic.
Very, 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 very interesting stories. Let me just go, Charles, to you with a follow-up question. Coming from Polygon, you have a very different culture, like you said, than Hedera. The Hedera culture it's unique among all. So, it's different from what you've conventionally seen in the Hedera governing council. So, what has happened, like, in terms of, you've got a very strong native crypto background. What's different about Hedera, and how do you hope to influence the culture of the Hedera governing council?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main differentiators I can tell you was a big challenge and pain point at any chains prior to me coming to Hedera was the fixed cost structure of the chain. So that doesn't matter if, if you're a large corporation and you go in and you try to do your financial modeling and you have to tell your CFO, like, hey, this monkey picture got popular on the other side of the globe. We kind of messed up our whole model. That's a real difficult conversation to have. On the flip side of that, if you're an individual builder and you've done some really great artwork and you want to put out 100 pieces, 200 pieces, again, you're back to this cost modeling of if gas fees go up, if something happens, and those type of people are looking penny to penny, dollar to dollar. They can't really afford to have their community not be involved with their project and keep it financially viable. So the fixed cost structure was something that was very different. And I will say, just the long-term thought process of this governing council and really coming together and saying, like, these are the things we need over the next several decades and years. We don't come into these meetings and say, I need this next week. Like that's not typically how the large companies move or think. But I hope that the community and the ecosystem broadly understands that the things that enterprises need are at such a higher quality than even most individual builders even need, but they still get the same cost as these big companies. So the savings happen on both sides. The fixed structure happens on both sides. And the same technology that somebody as big as Magalu is using is the same technology that an individual artist building a one-of-one is using. And you rarely see that in technology.
Yeah, definitely. The culture of Hedera, the governing council, is semi-corporate, but more so by far than crypto in general. And it's the long-term strategic thinking that really attracted me. Like Simon, I was on the sideline too. I heard about Hashgraph in 2017. And I was like, I had been watching up until that point, Bitcoin and Ethereum. And I was like, this is awesome, but there's no way I'm going to invest in it. I just can't do it until I met Hashgraph. And so I think that's a common story, Simon, that you shared. Let me ask you a question. You've been with the governing council, Simon, for 6 years or however long at Magalu. How has it changed during that time?
It's funny. I was reflecting on this last night, and people forget. So at the time, there was a sea of layer one platforms, and they all had competing claims, and it was very difficult to differentiate who really had what they said they had and who didn't. So we really had to take a leap of faith. Initially, when we signed the governing council agreement, I think we were the second or third company to do so. So you, at certain point, again, you just have to take that leap of faith. But things have changed, infinitely. So the network wasn't even public at first, right? So we were there for open access. But until that, you don't really know. Well, it's supposed to scale. Is it really going to be able to scale? So now, we've got over, I think, 1,000 transactions per second running on the network. Now we've got over 30 billion transactions processed, over the history of Hedera. So, but in those days, we didn't know any of that. So we had to really, cross our fingers. But again, doing your due diligence and looking at the people involved and digging into the technology is kind of what gives you the comfort. But there's been a lot of things also, So for example, we knew how the governing council was supposed to work, but you can have these frameworks, and whether people behave the way they're supposed to in real life is another issue. And thankfully, on that point, again, we've also really nailed it in the sense that I think the quality of the council members, the quality of the individuals, the level of their engagement and everything has really surpassed everyone's expectations. And so, things are really sort of night and day from where they were in the early days. And again, we didn't know whether we'd be able to attract, highest quality governing council members. So, as example, from technology companies, we've got Google, we've got IBM, we've got Dell, we've got ServiceNow. From banking, we've got Standard Bank, which is the largest bank in South Africa. We've got Shinhan Bank, which is the largest bank in South Korea. We've got DBS, which is the largest bank in Singapore. And so, but again, in the early days, we really didn't know, this looks great on paper, will it actually work? And much to our, glee, it actually has worked. And yeah, it's going really well.
Yeah, it is amazing, Simon. And I can also reflect in just conversations I have had in my world of healthcare. There is a kind of a leap of faith element, and certainly was, in the early days, because you're saying, look, we're taking these use cases that are about, let's say, human lives or improving cancer research, very, very important, for which there's massive fines and reputational kind of damage if we don't get it right. And we're gonna, as part of our stack, we're gonna have this public ledger that nobody's heard of. So it is amazing. I was just this morning in preparation for this call, I was looking at the numbers a little bit. I think Hedera just passed 39 billion transactions. I think average CPS was about 1,500. I mean, that's, I remember the days vividly, like in 2020 as an example, when, it was something when we hit 2 TPS, and we run one of the mirror nodes in the community. And it's funny because, the success and the growth of the network, obviously, if you're actually building an index or mirror and explorer, there's a cost, but when you're talking about a billion records or whatever, okay, that's manageable. But when all of a sudden it goes from 1 billion to 5 billion to 20 billion, it's astronomical, the cost factor. So much of this we have seen. And I'm going to kind of continue with this theme of the evolution. It's really a question for both of you guys, and feel free to provide commentary with your different backgrounds. So one of the things that we have all heard in the community, Mance, I think as recently as last month, spoke about this, is that the barriers to entry for governing council members are higher than ever. Yes, there's this 39 governing council cap, or like the 39 step book type of thing, but we don't have to be there. And I think we have all seen, to all intents and purposes, that the 29.30 with Hitachi, certainly when it comes to decentralized decision making, the governing council, protecting them against forking, all those things seem to be working. So where I'm going with this is, tell us a little bit about kind of how do you evaluate prospective governing council members? How do you look at their use cases? Are there ways in which you evaluate the merits of the use cases? I think we're all, and this is a question that was repeated by a number of people in the community, so I think there's a lot of interest in this area.
Great. So I guess I can get started. I'm the co-chair, by the way, of membership committee. So Bill Miller and I are actually responsible for leading a lot of these efforts. And I'll tell you, it reminds me of my days as a venture capitalist, because you start out and every company looks really good. And then over time, you develop, you discern more, you're better at judging things, and you actually wind up getting higher quality companies, and you're able to sort of raise the bar. And that's essentially what's happened. The other interesting thing is there's tons of pitfalls, believe it or not. So sometimes it's a great company, Fortune 500 company, great. And then you look underneath the surface, who's leading the effort? Oh, it's just the sales guy. And he's just doing it because he wants to reach the companies that are on the council with his own solution or something like that, right? Or sometimes you get a company that's doing it and it's someone from, let's say, marketing who's doing it for marketing reasons, or you do it, someone's under pressure from their board of directors to show that they're, into new technologies. So over time, you kind of learn you learn what the pitfalls are. And that said, though, the quality of the companies that are approaching us to investigate joining the council has never been higher. And we're absolutely thrilled, and we think that as time passes and this market gets a little bit more mature, we think that we're going to continue get a strong flow of new candidates. And I'll tell you another thing which is interesting was with all the FTX scandal and everything, if you were at a Fortune 500 company and you were bringing up doing something with distributed ledger technology over the last 18 months, it was a really hard sell. But my sense is that this nuclear winter, so to speak, is thawing. And I think that we're going to continue to see very high quality people from some of the most, iconic companies in the world applying for membership. So super happy about that.
And then Simon, to be clear, I mean, obviously, as you explained, there's been an evolution, and you're seeing a lot more like high quality like applications. But is there do you have like an assessment tool? Do you have like some hard criteria that you must meet? I know about the numbers, like the $1 billion kind of revenue, but are there other metrics that you guys have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have, I think there's like 4 different criteria that we're looking for. And the fourth of those sort of elements that we're looking for is sort of a catch-all, which is that maybe they don't present all of the other 3 criteria that are necessary, but if they can add value to the council in some unique way, then we're willing to consider companies that might not otherwise qualify. So that might be someone represents an industry in which we don't have, which let's say represents a lot of potential, but maybe we don't have a member yet from that industry. It can be a domain expertise or a skill set that particular council member might bring to the table, which would go far in advancing Hedera in some way. And yes, the use cases are extremely important. And again, as time goes on, we're getting applicants with a higher degree of sophistication. It's still early days, and so you might not have it's not a hard and fast requirement that they have a immediately planned use case. A lot of companies want to join the council because they're interested in the area and they don't know much about it yet, so they see it as a opportunity to learn and get a sort of a 360-degree view of what other companies are building around the world. So there's a lot of different situations, but of course, all things being equal, we want to increase the flow of transactions on the network. And so, yes, if a company were to apply and did have an interesting use case, that would be seen as very compelling by us.
Got it. So yeah, that was the fourth. That's the fourth criteria, which is, I'm going to say, kind of like distinguished characteristics. What are the other 3 areas that you're looking at?
Yeah, so we'd like to see companies that are essentially Fortune 500 companies in their region. And again, the signaling value of having these iconic brands, on the council is really important to us. You can think of it as almost mimetic fitness, right? So the fact that these big companies have chosen our platform and are interested in engaging on this topic, the signaling value is just really powerful. So that's another one. I don't remember the other ones. I should remember the other ones off the top of my head. But those are the main points.
Understood. Charles, do you have anything in addition that you'd like to explore on this?
Yeah, I think one of the things we're really fortunate on having is, Simon and the membership committee that, is there, because for someone like myself with a BD background that talks to a lot of these large companies, now, I have the benefit of not making that decision myself, so I can have these conversations and it's not up to me. So when people come to me and say, can I be a member of the governing council? The answer is, I don't know yet. Not from me, but I can definitely make those introductions and send them through to the membership committee. Membership committee makes those decisions. So that's another point of the decentralization in how the network works, is that there's not a single individual just saying, this person's my friend, I'm going to add them to the governing council. That is just not a possibility within our network. The other thing I will touch on that's really interesting is there are a lot of people that see the logos in the major companies and they think, that's not a very, quote unquote, crypto centric company. But I think if you look a little bit deeper and you actually discuss the topic of this industry with the individual representing that company, you'll find something very different. They are the representatives from these companies are extremely knowledgeable in the area, and they are essentially the educators for their entire organization. So when they come to these council meetings, they come to the committees, which are held all the time. They retain information, they gain information, they take that back to their companies, and they're really the Hedera advocates within their organization. So that's something that, you know, I was reading an article this morning where there was a particular chain being mentioned, and they were bragging extensively about how they had a 13-person voting committee, and it kind of made me laugh that it's like Hedera has 30 now, and we're working on going to 39, and you know, these people had an entire key article written because they had just now gotten 13 people, and it's like that's how we've always done business. So, you know, it's nice to see people trying to catch up, I guess.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I read that too, and I saw it a little bit earlier in one of the various social media, and it's funny because there's a little bit of a sleight of hand in it too. If you know the people, you know, they've kind of spawned off. It's like, you know, my neighbor's here, and you know, there's my cousin. I took it with a little grain of salt, to be honest with you, on that one, Charles. It's not quite the process that we go through with Hedera. But I do want to kind of, Simon, you mentioned this. Maybe, Charles, you could start commenting on this a little bit. So we know that, Simon, you and Bill Miller run Memcom. Of course, Lehman has been running TechCom for a long time, as well as other people. So I think the repeated question in the community is, you know, how do you guys figure out the board members? How do you measure their value? You know, there's a little bit of opacity when it comes to board members, other than the meeting notes that most everybody looks at. And I think we're just interested to see, okay, well, well, we know obviously that a lot happens behind the scenes, but just a little bit about the board, the different committees and the board members, and how their value is assessed over time.
Great. So I'll just jump in. It's awesome. And it's funny. It's one of the things that most drives me crazy, because I really wish the community could have a better insight into how much goes on behind the scenes, and how much we, you know, discuss and torture the premises of every one of these decisions that we're making. So I'll give you some example. So let's see, what we've done is we've organized the individual council member representatives into different committees. So again, there's GovCom, which is governance related issues. There's Marcom, which is marketing. There's CoinCom, which is coin and token economics. Memcom, membership. CorpCom, which is the corporate use cases. Those are the primary committees. Each of those committees has a co-chair, and then there's probably, depending on the committee, maybe 20 to 30 people who show up twice a month to dig into some of these issues, in addition to leadership calls and other things, right? What we've done is what we're doing now is we're articulating OKRs, which stand for Objectives and Key Results, for the year. And so right now we're still in January. I think we have our first full council meeting February 14th or so. And what the different committees are going to do is they're going to present their OKRs for the year. And so that's decided by the committee chairs with input from the committee members, and then presented to the full council at the council meeting. And then we'll receive feedback there, and those will be the items that we'll be focusing on for the year. And so that's kind of how it's set up to work. And the idea is to have a level of accountability in terms of what we're focusing on. Of course, if there's things that come up during the year that require our attention, we can change things around slightly. But we wanted people to have objectives that they were, you know, focused on achieving during the year, and sort of that's the way we're structuring it.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I love hearing it, because obviously most of us, I wouldn't say obviously, but a lot of us as builders or folks building companies do OKRs. I mean, I know at Acorn we do it. You know, spend a lot of time thinking through it and measuring people and assessing ourselves honestly. So it's really good to see that. And it's interesting. Simon mentioned that one of the very first acquisitions we had was with John Doerr. And of course, him and Andrew Grove are behind OKRs as it was adopted by Google. So yeah, it's really good to see that, because that is, nothing is fully objective, but that certainly is much more objective than just, like having somebody's opinion about certain things. So yeah, wonderful to see. Charles, anything in addition that you've seen that, or maybe some of the things that you're bringing in from your experience into this imputing the value of the committees?
Yeah, the committees are really interesting. I like the fact that they do meet often, and there's a lot of input that I get from around the globe, and just sitting in and listening on a lot of those. Obviously, my background is mostly in business growth, high growth technology. So from my standpoint, it's a really good balance, because we have the really strong and deep governance that has strength in numbers. And then you have someone like myself that's always thinking about high velocity and growth and business sense. And we kind of come together in the middle of, we're able to move fast, make good decisions without me breaking everything at the same time. So it's a good balance, actually, to have those kind of thought processes go through things. And, the OKRs, I was looking over those from 2023, and I believe between our organization, we had 50 OKRs. And so for me and my background in doing OKRs, that's an extreme number of OKRs. Yeah. And so I think this year, we're moving those down to probably half that number, but just focusing on things that are much stronger business oriented, enterprise oriented, and growth oriented. So those are the things that are, really excited. We've got the structure and the framework down, and now we can really put things on the rails and, get them moving forward. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Comment. So this, Charles, this may be something for you, or Simon, you as well, if you'd like. Are some OKRs about individual council members driving or championing Hedera within their own organization? So maybe growing it from a department to multiple departments or interdepartmental. Are there OKRs around that? And do you have some examples that could provide on that?
I think one of the ones that we're working on is an OKR around governing council member engagement, and that's just that's kind of the idea of them taking it up to higher levels within their organization. But a lot of that is making sure that we're ready to handle an organization like that as well. I mean, there's just simple accounting things that every business in every region needs something a little bit different, a little bit different type of an invoice, a little bit different type of a contract, and so. It's just really the localization of how we do business with all of our council members is, we're working fast on our side, they work fast on their side, and we're trying to make sure that engagement grows together. So, yeah, I mean, I will say the council members work very hard on getting that engagement into their organizations. Hedera's, and all of our other, related organizations, we work really hard at doing the same. And I think we're finally getting to a point where it's starting to click and mold together really well. So, I mean, we're getting pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I think we're seeing some evidence in the community already. Certainly over the last few months, I think there's all kinds of ways we can look at data points, including, frankly, the two of you guys being on this kind of a call, because clearly your actions are matching to those OKRs to engage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many lessons that me as a builder can learn on my project in how to behave in a decentralized manner, how to mitigate some of that risk of me being responsible all the time and create that balance, like you said. And for the HBAR Foundry as well, we're trying to, model ourselves as much after, the lessons that are learned from the governing council and the governance of Hedera. So, Simon, what are some of the takeaways, things that you've learned, or any things that you've learned that really stick out from being involved with the governing council that you can share with us that we can put to work in our own projects and organizations?
Sure. I mean, a lot of the stuff is just, there's a lot of council specific stuff that we've learned. So for example, when I remember when we first started and we were given the laptops to do the transaction signing, and you have to keep it in a safe, and everything was like cryptographically encoded, and so I gave one laptop to the director of cybersecurity at our company and another laptop to the director of fraud, prevention or whatever, to be responsible for the other. And that didn't work because they're really busy, right? So the learning was, wait a second, I need to find like really engaged mid-level people and have them do it because they have the time, they have the bandwidth, and giving it to these top directors, I thought I was doing the right thing, but it wasn't. And there's a lot of nuts and bolts things that you learn. So for example, most companies have a rule that you need 3 people to sign an account before transferring money or anything like that. So how do you do that with an individual crypto wallet, right, to receive HBARs? So there's a lot of like kind of nuts and bolts stuff that you learn along the way. And one of the great things about the council is that we can share our what we've learned together. So a new company, we're joining the council, we can say, oh, yeah, you don't want to give it to the top guys, find people who have this sort of profile, and those are the right people to be signing the transactions. And yeah, if you're going to be receiving HBARs, which we all will at some point, then you're going to want to set up the wallet this way and use the solution so that you can do it. So there's a lot of like practical know-how that's been amassed. And again, that's one of the benefits of having this governing council, is that we can share these things with the other large companies, so, this is how we implemented at Google, this is how we implemented at Magalu. And so it's sort of almost like a federalist laboratory of the states model, that you're seeing how different companies deal with different issues. So that's kind of what I would say.
That's quite awesome, because I mean, again, like this is kind of what we're doing at the Foundry. I don't know if it was by design or what, but we come together every Friday in an informal setting, and we share best practices across the table. We share the struggles that we're having from one project to the next, and a lot of our projects are now being involved with one another, leveraging the development from one platform to perform something that I need. Why should I develop it again? So is there any kind of collaboration like that on specific projects between governing council members?
Absolutely. And you raise a great point, which is that we're really big into open source. And we actually, Hedera brought on a executive who's specifically responsible for that. And I can tell you, and again, this is where internal, it's a shame that you guys can't be sort of a fly on the wall for some of this. There is a lot of pressure that, hey, if you're going to be building something, try to build it in a way that's open source so that the different modules can be reused by other council members or other developers in the community, so they can, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and so they can sort of, take part of the open source code and reuse it in their own project, which will help accelerate it. So yeah, that's a big part of what we're trying to do, and that is I can remember multiple discussions where that's been emphasized. So yeah, definitely. Andrew Aiken is actually the executive who's brought on to do that, and he's super engaged and really vocal about it. And so I think you can expect good things from us in that direction.
Yeah, I think so. He's off to a good start. We'll put it that way for sure. And so how about you, Charles? You spent a lot of years outside of crypto. Hedera is a different animal, but still there's probably a lot of best practices that you learned working with these other networks that you can bring to the table. Are there things that Hedera is doing right that you learned from the other more crypto native platforms?
I mean, one I will touch on that, HBAR Foundry actually has a pretty big impact on is, adding and contributing to the repos when it comes to open source. And so this is one of the practical pieces of knowledge of someone like myself coming in, understanding the venture capital world and how they view specific projects that are out there that are looking for follow-on funding and investing is, typically what they'll do is they'll say, you've built on an open source platform. They'll go directly to the repos. They'll say, okay, how many people are actually building within this type of an ecosystem? If it's not that robust and it's not that high, that actually has an effect on some of their investment decisions from a venture capital standpoint. And then they start going into the community side of things, is how much chatter do we have on Discord and Twitter and X, or whatever we want to call it these days. And they weigh that against the thing. So when we work on these open source projects, having builders out there that actually go in and contribute to the code or work on things within the code, I can tell you right now, all of the stuff that Andrew's working on, and we're using some analytics tools to go through and see like who are the biggest contributors, how much are they contributing, and we're able to kind of get an idea of when the organizations like HBAR Foundation or Hashgraph Association or DLT Sciences Foundation, when they are out there giving these developer grants, we want to make sure that we're doing our best job to make sure that these projects can eventually be successful. And by having those open source aspects and having all of those other contributing factors that add to network effects is only going to make the work that those organizations do that much better. And so that's one of the things coming in immediately. I kind of started seeing those things and making sure that we can move in the right direction doing that. And I think we're heading there very quickly.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the takeaway here is the network effects, because what you get is that synergy. Like even on my own project, when I joined the Foundry, it's been several years now, I immediately started to meet people with resources and ideas that I didn't have. And it allowed me to jump forward. And I'm sure the same thing is going to happen from what Andrew is doing with all of these other projects that are involved. So it's good to know that it helps the network be perceived from the outside when all these little projects actually get in there and make even tiny contributions to the repos of those makes a huge difference. And so that is awesome. Let me change it just a little bit, change direction. You guys both attended Davos. Either one of you have something you want to share about what happened? What are the takeaways and insights that you came away with?
I didn't go, so that's Charles.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I will say incredible discussions. There was a lot of people very interested in the things that Hedera was doing. A lot of the promenade, where most of the storefronts are, you'd see generally a lot of talk about AI, but that leaned in our favor quite a bit because a lot of the discussions were around AI and how you kind of authenticate the provenance of the data, or how do we prevent deep fakes, or how do we have a quote unquote, proof of human when somebody's logging in and starting to do these blog posts? Are they using, Chat GPT and things of that nature? So a lot of really good conversations with great organizations out there that are really looking for a solution around the data and the AI, and then data AI moving into connected to IoT devices. And how do we make these things safer? Because the velocity of this technology it's going so fast that they want to ensure that they can keep themselves out of the crosshairs of litigation, or, possibly just completely by accident infringing on other people's IP. And so that was a main concern of a lot of the attendees in Davos.
Yeah, and it's a big concern. It's definitely a concern of mine. How about you, Jim? What do you think about that? Of the AI component?
Yeah. I mean, no doubt. It's funny, Charles. I know, not to digress too much, but one of the things that you and I have spoken about, is really all to do with how we can kind of bake in Hedera as really part of a reference architecture for some of the work, as example, that's happening around cancer research, or, for instance, novel pathogen early detection. And AI is a huge accelerator and really enabler when it comes, for instance, with AI, even ChatGPT, you're able to, by looking at massive amounts of data, you're able to determine cell mutations way faster, with way more efficacy than any top radiologist could do, or you could do through MRI scans or mammograms and things like this. However, there's always this question of, even if you cite the origin of the data, can you trust it? Like how do you trust it? Because there's all kinds of derivations, and it's very, very easy, even completely inadvertently, because, like, not to digress too much, but you take the raw data and you need to make it anonymized or to aggregate it. Then you use that data for like double blind testing and all these other things. But it's just very, very easy for that data to be rogue at some point. So that's one of the use cases that certainly, we have been working at ACOR, and it's finally beginning to echo this idea that you need to actually prove the origin of any data and any of these transformations when it comes to, for instance, cancer research. It's that literally lives on the line, not to mention billions of dollars. So that's a segue, if you like. And of course, I'm very biased when it comes to healthcare and medical research. But I would love you guys to opine a little bit on what are some of the underserved industries, maybe communities that Hedera would like to get into, and what are some of the efforts that are happening on that front?
Charles, you want to go?
Yeah,
I can go. Go for it.
Yeah, I think right now is when we're talking about underserved communities in general, there's still, even though we talk about this technology all the time and we're using it on a daily basis, for the broader globe, this is still a relatively new technology. The adoption really isn't there for anyone quite yet. And that's, with the governing council, that's why it's helpful to have the trust of those names doing that, because in a lot of cases it seems like a B2B play where Hedera is working with these governing council members, but we also have to remember on the other side of their business is their consumers. And so really it's a B2B to C type of a play. I will say that one of the things I've always found really helpful is bringing technologies like this into underserved and underbanked areas. So some decentralized finance and underbanked areas are places where it's really difficult to have fair access to finances. Connecting to IoT devices where it's really important to create trustless environments where humans could have some potential corruption is always really important. And that happens a lot in supply chain and global shipping. So a lot of those areas we work on all of the time, but I always tell people, working at Hedera is like working with electricity. Like it's very difficult to say who couldn't use it. It's just how many of those people can we actually get to in a short amount of time. There's almost practically a use case for most people in most industries on the globe. So that's exciting, but that's also very challenging because you want to stay focused and you want to move in very deliberate ways. But when you wake up in the morning, you're like, I could talk to anybody today and they could use this.
How do you specifically prioritize those? Like, how are you picking your targets now?
Yeah, I think for me, it's one of the things that's easiest is when we either have a governing council member or just another company. There are a lot of companies that use the technology that are not part of the council or not part of the council yet. When you already have a case study in your hand and you can go to somebody and say, hey, this is no longer theoretical. This is happening. This is the case study. In fact, let me introduce you to the member who built it. That level of trust and power when it comes into speaking to other companies is, you can't beat that. We don't, at that point, it turns into, going out talking about theory into here's the person that built it. It's working today. And by the way, go use it. That conversation's easier than any.
No doubt.
Sam, you you mentioned your role on Memcom and this kind of like the industries or potential members who bring new potential. Yeah, can you is there an example you can kind of talk about a little bit on perhaps some I'm not going to, maybe not underserved, but companies or industries that are not yet in the governing council?
Yeah, so what we do is, it's funny, from the very beginning, we wanted to diversify across geographical regions and across industries. So we've got a list of different industries, we've got a list of different geographies, and what we're trying to do is kind of optimize for those two lists, getting companies or institutions from different areas. So I'll give you one example. We'd like to have some, nonprofits potentially to join the council. So we've talked to a few, but we really haven't found exactly the right fit yet. We've got plenty of leading universities who are on the council. So that's great. So that's one area. I think maybe real estate was another area where we didn't have someone. Maybe pharmaceuticals or healthcare was another area that we were, looking at. But again, someone can be from an area that we're already involved in if they add value in a different way. So, again, we're looking for people who are really going to be able to contribute. So from the Memcon perspective, when we have these discussions, we ask, hey, are you going to be the one that's going to be attending the council meetings? Who from your team is going to be contributing? So we really it's about high quality interactions. And actually, one of the things I didn't mention earlier, in addition to having these OKRs, it's funny, but peer pressure plays a big role because you've got all these smart, talented people contributing, and no one wants to be the laggard who's not contributing. So I think that there's this healthy sense of peer pressure as well, whether it's attending the meetings or speaking up in the meetings or adding value in different ways. I think that's really an important force as well. But anyway, yeah, it gives you a general idea.
That's brilliant. It's funny. Every time as we're talking through, you guys are citing certain things, and when you hear it kind of bluntly like this, it's like, oh wow, that actually makes sense. It kind of does make sense. I don't think, at least I'm just going to speak for myself, being kind of, I guess, having not thought about this that deeply, but that this idea that there is peer pressure, that you do have OKRs, you are being measured. That there's this thing that I often kind of use when I'm speaking about, kind of why public ledger is the Hawthorne effect. But what it amounts to is that when you're being watched, you tend to be a good actor. So I kind of like, in some ways that's what you're saying, Simon, is that everybody, looks at the governing council. There's a high profile, and just that alone, and all these high quality people, there is a pressure to perform and drive some of this. And I think that's a really valuable insight. That's really fantastic. So, yeah. I'm sorry, what was there a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say this is another example of how the network from the top down is oriented towards kind of utility and application and solving problems, which is different than crypto kind of like at large. We have speculators and a lot of cultural stuff. Meme coins comes to mind as being something that has largely driven other platforms a lot, has gotten a lot of traction. We've seen a lot of warmth from meme coins in the Hedera ecosystem. Do you guys have any feedback on the meme coin craze, and will it turn off enterprises or does it promote adoption?
So I tend to dislike it because I think it does a disservice as a whole to the distributed ledger technology industry. And you guys probably saw that the op-ed piece by that certain economist in the New York Times, who wrote, blockchain, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing, And it's amazing the amount of disinformation and lack of understanding about the what's really, driving the technology. So the correct way to think of it is distributed ledger technology is the underlying technology, just like, the internet was the underlying technology. The early killer apps which drove the adoption of the internet were email, portals, browsers, right? The early killer apps which drove adoption of DLT were cryptocurrencies, NFTs, and DeFi, right? But the problem is, in the popular opinion, people conflate those early killer apps with the technology, and they're completely different. I think, meme coins are interesting. Human behavior is interesting. But what drives me a little crazy about it is when we're trying to talk to people about distributed ledger technology and all they know is about meme coins and they think it's exactly the same thing. So that's it. It helps pollute the signal to noise ratio. So I guess that's my personal opinion. But again, nothing against it, but it's not helpful, I think, for the industry in some ways. But anyway, Charles, interested to hear your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think culturally I will say from a B2B standpoint and talking to enterprises, it's difficult to have those conversations when you walk into the room and they essentially say like, oh, you work for a blockchain or a DLT. So what do you think about this or that coin? And it's like, okay, this is a very different conversation than, we were really trying to go down. And kind of to Simon's point, it is that use case where it is the underlying technology. It's similar to the internet, and just using the email reference, it's, you go through your emails. Some of them are things that you understand and you want, and then you go to your spam email box and, you've got royalty from other countries trying to send you $20 billion because you're next of kin. And it's like, okay, like there's some noise there. And it took several years for people to actually figure out what was signal and what was noise. I will say, like, on the meme coin side, it is interesting how human behavior kind of acts when it comes to that. Some of them out there are, they're just interesting. They're just different use cases that the people use the technology they build. And I think one of the testaments to that is people can go and use the code and build what they want. And it's not us saying, don't do it. We can't really tell them not to build meme coins and make funny names about them and promote them all over the internet. That's their business. It does make it difficult to have B2B conversations, though, sometimes, depending on the context.
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we are just out of time. I do want to, Tony's going to do a quick next steps. I do want to just thank you guys. I mean, you've been incredible, supportive really since day one, very, very open. We learned a lot. I mean, I learned a lot. I'm sure the rest of us who've listened in will echo. So thank you so much for your time, Charles, Simon. It really was highly insightful, and we would love to have the open reservation to come back at some point, maybe a little bit near the latter part of the year to reconnect.
Yeah, definitely. In what's coming up next, we certainly want you guys involved in that too, with the HBAR Foundry. So for those who don't know, the HBAR Foundry is a collection of experts throughout the ecosystem that come together on a weekly, sometimes more than that basis, to work on building ecosystem tooling, establishing technical standards, promoting knowledge sharing. And we also have a number of open source infrastructure projects that we're working on. Specifically, we're coming up, we have a meeting this week, our launch meeting for a Hedera Hashgraph decentralized communications infrastructure. We believe we should have commons infrastructure that people can port their contacts and messaging from one dApp to another, so we don't have the messaging wars that we saw happen in Web 2. So we encourage you guys to be a part of it, and all the developers as well. We're also working on name serving infrastructure. We think that's plumbing and commons that everybody should be able to contribute to and build off of. And we're also trying to tackle the idea of how do we create an economic model around the mirror nodes. And I know the Governing Council is working that as well, but the ecosystem itself is very concerned about that. So let me extend an invitation to everybody to attend our Friday meetings. Friday founding meetings are at 10 a.m. Central, 8 a.m. Pacific on Fridays. We have an Asia Pacific date on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Central. It's an opportunity to meet and greet other projects, voice your ecosystem concerns, present a group with technical issues that you may be having on your particular project, collaborate around those, pitch your ideas, and also network with some of the Hedera Black Belts like Jim, Ken Anderson, and people from so many great projects that you know. So please join us at the HBAR Foundry. Gentlemen, thank you so much for attending. We really love the dialogue between us and the opportunity to learn more about the Governing Council. And we thank everybody for attending. Please like, share, spread this on Twitter. Take the link, push it around so more and more people hear about what we're doing and get involved. So thank you, Jim,
Yeah,
for organizing.
everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.